As we contemplate better stories, it would appear from things that you've said and written that potentially the United States of America is embarking on a better story, and that perhaps your own home country, Canada, may, in the new year, be embarking on a better story. What's your reflection on the political trends in the new world? And what's your reflection, or what are your reflections, about the situation that we find ourselves in the old world?
Well, I pray, let's say, that the Democrats, that there's still some residual leadership lurking in the dark heart of the decimated Democrats, and that one or more of them will step forward as a genuine leader and help the Democrats shed their idiot obsession with the radical utopian left. The Democrats I've met, who are agreeable people, nice people, let's say, and empathic people, although not nearly so much as they think, they have no imagination for evil. That's the problem with being naive and agreeable. And they've allowed themselves to be devoured by the scuttling monsters of the diverse left. And that's a really bad idea. I mean, I'm a clinical psychopathologist, and I know what the shadow of diversity looks like, and it's not pretty. Looks like sterilizing and mutilating children for moral reasons. That would be one of its manifestations, at the hands of self-absorbed autogynephiles who lie about everything, including their own sexual predilections. And so that's some of the closer regions of the outer boundaries of diversity. And when you get past that, it gets ugly fast, believe me. And the Democrats are completely blind to for the typical bloody moderate Democrat, every criminal is a victim. It's like, look, buddy, some criminals are victims, and some criminals are the sort of people you don't want under your bed. And if you forget that long enough, you'll find that out, and it will not be a happy day for you. And so the Democrats need to sort themselves the hell out, and the faster the better, because I'm pretty happy with the transformation in leadership that's occurred in the United States, but that doesn't mean it couldn't go seriously sideways if it wasn't opposed by a credible opposition. I mean, we know that. There's no reason to assume that the new crowd, especially in its fringe elements, will be any less susceptible to the blandishments of power than the old crowd, which is why we need an adversarial system, at least to some degree. And the Democrats just can't provide that at the moment because they're so fractured and bent and demented in their postmodern neo-Marxism that, they think that men can become women. That's how confused they are. You can't be any more confused than that. You've hit a pinnacle of confusion when you can't admit to the distinction upon which survival and reproduction itself rests. You've hit maximal confusion. Now, hopefully they'll sort themselves out. They have in the past. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with Musk and Ramaswamy and Gabbard and Vance. And they're remarkable people. They're very diverse in their viewpoints and their personalities. But the question of whether they can unify themselves or whether we'll see a continual clash of titans, we saw that a little bit last week with the brouhaha over the spending bill pending.
Yes.
That was pending before Congress. Look, better that than the alternative, because I saw what the postmodern leftists did to the universities, and I don't know if they'll ever recover. I can't see how. In Canada now, we've been run by a juvenile narcissist for 10 years. And I knew he was a narcissist to begin with because he didn't have the credentials to dare to put himself forward as a viable candidate for prime minister. There's nothing in his background apart from his name that has suggested that he had the ability, the wherewithal, the wisdom, the experience, the judgment to dare to lead a G7 country. Now, he could have learned, because stranger things have happened, but he didn't. And the consequence of that is that Canada, the richest province in Canada, is now, by per capita GDP, poorer than the poorest state in the United States. That's also true for the UK, by the way. And so that's happened in 9 years, because we were in Canada, we were basically at parity with the US 10 years ago. And that's just the beginnings of what catastrophe has befallen Canada. I mean, we have racial riots in Canada now. Do you know how hard we had to work to have race riots in Canada? Like, we're finally, what would you say, on the same plane as our American cousins. We managed to import racial strife into Canada, despite the fact that we had none of it and not the history to produce it.
It does look as though next year Trudeau will be on his way out, but it's also a year of elections here in Europe, particularly in Germany. Do you have thoughts about the future direction of Germany, France, and indeed the United Kingdom?
Well, the barbarians are at the gates, boys and girls, and we better decide if Europe is worth preserving, because it could go either way, and very, very quickly. That's already happening. We had an ARC meeting in Germany, in Bavaria, and we invited about 200 German citizens to attend that. And I think probably the most notable part of that conference was Bjorn Lomborg's speeches, which is not that surprising, because Lomborg is so informed and so sensible that, you know, you have to be a fool to oppose him publicly, especially without careful preparation. You know, Bjorn has accepted the inevitability of a relatively mild shift in climate over the next 100 years. Now, whether that's a viable prediction, well, that's neither here nor there at the moment. But that's his essentially moderate stance. And then he's modeled the economic consequence of that and laid out a vision for how that can be ameliorated. It's by no means emblematic of anything approximating a catastrophe. And if handled properly, it could be a good thing, because cold kills way more people than heat continually, particularly in places like Europe, which, if we hadn't noticed, are cold and dark and wet often. And so the Germans there said that they were so relieved, because in Germany, you cannot oppose the climate apocalypse narrative without risking your skin. And so that's got to change, and it will change, because what's happening in Germany and the UK and France, it's not sustainable. Obviously, you people in the UK, I think you now pay 5 times as much for energy as Americans. It's like, energy is work. Your work has now become 5 times as expensive as the work of Americans. Now, how the hell are you going to compete with that fundamental problem plaguing you personally and socially? And this is so appalling. I mean, look, the mere fact that nuclear was taken off the table by the Greens shows you that they're essentially playing an anti-human game. It's like, look, people, is carbon the problem? Like, yes or no? Well, yes, obviously carbon is the problem. Okay, is nuclear carbon free? Yes. Is it reliable, and can it be made cheap? Yes. Do you support it? No. Oh, so then carbon isn't the problem. What's the problem? Well, we're not going to tell you, because it reveals us for the murderous, what would you say, murderous sycophants that we, murderous nature worshipping sycophants that we truly are. Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. So the devastating Malthusian narratives that have dominated public discourse since the mid-1960s, they have to go. And there's no biological justification for them, by the way. The idea that human beings can be modeled by the behavior of yeast in a petri dish, you know, this zero-sum idea of what constitutes resource, any biologist who says that has immediately indicated that he or she has no understanding whatsoever of the human ecological niche, because the human ecological niche is the capacity to redefine what constitutes resource. Right. This is a major biological transformation. It's It's the thing that makes human beings unique, is we can shift our axioms, which means that once we've run out of agar in the Petri dish, we can find another source of food, which we've done. That's what defines human beings. We've done that since our onset.